German. And one of the things we try to convince all of our Notre Dame students of, and we really try to make the case for this with our book, is that you are doing philosophy all the time. You probably just don't realize that it's philosophy, and you don't realize that being more intentional about it could help you. So here's an example. Before I came to work this morning, my middle brother just had a baby. And so we've got this little niece in our family right now. And my mom is texting me about, just how wonderful this baby is and how much she means to our family, that she's now part of the family, and what kinds of advice she ought to be giving my brother about being a great dad in light of that. This matters a lot to my mom. I mean, she's a busy lady. She's on her way to work. But pausing to think a little bit about what it means to add someone to a family and what are the responsibilities of a good father. Those are questions that the ancient Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, wrote about, and they're questions that still very much concern us and push us to more philosophical answers. So in God and the Good Life and in the book, we try to show that these questions are everywhere, and they might feel really overwhelming if you think that you have to, invent the wheel every time you encounter them. But in fact, knowing some philosophy and knowing how to talk about philosophy with other people is going to take you a long way towards finding answers that you're happier with.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I think in the God and the Good Life course, we definitely seem like to have a gap where students don't find philosophy as practical. Can you describe some of the day-to-day decisions? Maybe it's not fatherhood for our students, but like some of the stuff that students bring to class and kind of have to, pragmatize with the philosophy they get in the course.
I think a big question right now for a lot of students is they realize that there are issues they thought they would have the opportunity to talk about in college, things that have to do with our political life, that have to do with religious faith, that have to do with injustice and history. And they realize that these conversations are actually much harder to have than maybe they initially supposed. And just knowing how to be able to ask questions and seek the truth with other people, it's something, it sounds really highfalutin, but you imagine, I meet a lot of undergraduates who feel terrified to start to open up about views that they actually are developing about the good life and how they want to navigate their adult life. One thing that can be really practical, and we work on this really closely with the GGL fellows like you were, Ryan, and with the students when they first arrive in our class, is learning how to ask more open-ended questions about philosophical topics and learning how to seek out better reasons for your views and realizing that it's real work, but it's worth it, because a lot of times issues that seem really fraught or we treat our discussions as just kind of power games where we're trying to dominate the other person are very much unsatisfying. And one of the really amazing opportunities in college is to learn how to see things that look like, politics or arguments or things that seem really petty, and actually realize that there's a version of it that's elevated and is part of, wonderful conversations that you're meant to have at Notre Dame and through the rest of your life.
That's awesome. Yeah. I remember you talking about dinner party conversations and asking some of those strong questions, which I know makes an appearance in the book. So it's great to see kind of those questions keep going, especially in a class like God and the Good Life. And I know we could wax poetically for an hour about GGL if we had to, but Paul, can you share a little bit more about the genesis of the God and the Good Life course and your involvement in developing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually went to Notre Dame for my PhD. So one of the reasons this is a huge honor for me, honestly, is that I consider myself a Notre Dame alum. So, back when I was a couple of years into the program, I'd worked with Meghan in various capacities, but had been TAing for a class, just a regular Philo 101 class. And one thing that we noticed as we were teaching our students is that they were not reacting to philosophy the way that we react to philosophy, right? And, it was a great class, if I do say so myself. It was a fine Philo 101 class. But we found, as we presented these thinkers and we said, hey, here's Aristotle, here are the dates. Here's when he lived. Here's when he died. Here's some big, sort of ideas. Okay, now we're going to give you a test. Tell me those dates. What were those dates? And what are his big theories? We found students relating to philosophy like you might relate to, any sort of big required class that you're taking. And so this is deeply puzzling in a way to Meghan and I, because we go back and forth on text late at night, just with like New York Times op-eds. And we say like, I can't believe that this person is making a utilitarian assumption here and not even flagging it, right? for us, and I should speak for myself, but I think I can speak for both of us. Philosophy is a deeply practical, almost way of life. It's like, it's the way that we see the world, right? And so Meghan went on sabbatical. She comes back. There was some really great sort of discussion at that time in the administration about developing courses and trying new things. Meghan comes to me and she's like, "Look, Notre Dame should have its own signature philosophy course." And one of our inspirations at this point, I don't know if you've heard of this course at Harvard called Justice by Michael Sandel, but it should be like a virtue course, and it should be taught by faculty, right? It shouldn't just be like, look at the sort of this famous academic or something. So, we got to work starting to think about, okay, how can we break down this barrier to philosophy? And I won't bore you with like all the details. There's a lot of ways that we tried to do this. Part of it's just, building up a course website. Honestly, it's as simple as building up a course website that looks like the kind of thing that students go to get their news and to sort of do philosophy out in the world, even if they don't know that they're doing that. So part of it was, sort of digital design stuff. There was tons of pedagogy conversations we were having at this point. But, a huge part of this whole thing was just focusing on these questions, the right questions, and making sure that we did everything we could to give students access to those conversations. So they walk in day one and we ask them, do you want to be happy? Like, students are looking around, they're like, is this a trick question? Yeah, of course I do. And we say, that's philosophy, right? You want to be happy. And if you want to be happy, Aristotle thinks you've got to do some philosophy. Otherwise, you're in serious danger of pursuing the wrong goals, right? Wasting your life. So to put those big questions just directly in front of our students, and again, by any means necessary, whether that means like, filming these goofy YouTube videos that Meghan and I, put up in the course webpage, or whether it means, just doing some work to make sure that we're jumping into the text at the right spot. Our thought was like, let's do anything necessary to get these students to a point where we're all having this conversation, where we're all invited in. Man, I could say so much more, even about the role that the fellows play in this process. And maybe just for any viewers who aren't as familiar with the structure of the course, I'll just say, we've got about 40, 50 undergraduates who work for Notre Dame every semester as dialogue leaders, like you did, Ryan. And so they're literally leading an hour-long dialogue outside of the course with their peers. And so, this is, again, just one way in which that sort of philosophical community is kind of built outward. And really, like, I'm just thrilled that at this point, we're kind of at that point where, our students will walk by us on campus and just like shout something about Plato, and you'd be like, that's exactly what we were hoping for. So it's kind of the long and short of it, I guess.
That's what university should be, shouting at people about Plato across the quad.
Yeah.
But I think with my experience as a God in the Good Life Fellow, it makes it incredibly practical to what's going on. When you see people who are your age sometimes, or a year or two older, caring deeply about the course and some of the questions that come up, that for me was something that encouraged me to apply to be a fellow, and I think makes it really approachable to the students that we have. And it's one of those things where these themes aren't just applicable to 18, 19-year-old students trying to decide what to do with their lives. It's under Amazon as Catholic self-help. This is applicable to everyone. It's one of those, I was so happy when I saw the book, because it means that the audience, the people involved in GGL, and the way I see it, was just expanding exponentially. And so, Meghan, I guess my question to you is, why did you decide to write this book?
I think one thing that happened, GGL caught on really fast. I mean, that's one thing that's incredible about the Notre Dame community is its ability to kind of quickly create culture around something like a class like this. And so when Paul and I came out in 2015, 2016, saying we want Intro to Philosophy to be about care for your soul, not just memorizing facts about dead smart people in Europe, but caring for your soul, and that's the work of a Catholic institution, people got interested. That was kind of provocative. A lot of philosophers are not quite that aggressive and ambitious. And one thing that happened pretty quickly after that is started getting invitations to do like one-off philosophy seminars for adults and for like for business groups, for people that couldn't come to Notre Dame for an undergraduate degree. Like, that ship had sailed. But they were very curious about this idea that philosophy could help them understand who they are and what goals are worth going after in life. And so I remember a couple of years ago, I was out at MIT to do one of these seminars. And I was talking about nihilism. I was speaking to this huge packed lecture hall about like whether or not once we realize how small we are in the universe, that should encourage us to think that our lives are meaningless. And, there's, MIT is a very different kind of place than Notre Dame, but realize there's a huge kind of market for the thinking that we do here on our campus. And had gotten approached by an editor at Penguin, our editor, Ginny, who was like, have you ever thought that there are people other than Notre Dame college students who care about these kinds of questions that you guys are obsessed with? And I'm looking out at this group in Boston and thinking, yeah, I'm starting to put it together that there's maybe a bigger community that we should be engaging. So I went back to Paul. I think I called Paul that day and was like, hey, we got this kind of intriguing offer. Paul and I knew nothing about book publishing. I don't know if we should admit that on air. But we were like, yeah, this woman, I've heard of Penguin. I heard they write some books or publish some good books. Yeah. Like maybe we could write a book for them. And then things moved pretty quickly. And one thing that was really wonderful about working with that team and writing the book here at Notre Dame is we had this kind of crew of students and alumni and colleagues here on campus who were helping us think about the philosophy that we wanted to grow, but also a really amazing, just world-class team of editors at Penguin who know how to reach people with books. Because Paul and I know how to, write courses and write philosophy articles, but writing a big book like this that'll end up in Barnes and Noble and airports is really different ball of wax. And just had like this amazing community to work with on it. So I'm still a bit, I don't know, I can't speak for Paul, but it's still a little bit amazing to me that it's real. Like when it came in the mail, that kind of blew my mind. Or when we see it at Barnes and Noble, I saw it at Barnes and Noble in Chicago a couple weekends ago. So I still don't believe that we have written the book, but it's been a pretty amazing organic extension of this adventure we've been having here on campus.
Definitely. Yeah, no, it's exciting to see it in person. I almost didn't believe it. It's got beautiful cover and it's awesome. And Paul, I guess, can you speak a little bit to the process? What was the most exciting part in kind of, I know Meghan, you said like getting people involved on campus and bouncing ideas, but Paul, what was your favorite part of the process?
Oh yeah, so just like with the class, my favorite part is having the conversations. And a lot of times it takes a lot of work to have a good philosophical conversation, right? Like, you don't walk into a lecture hall and you're just like, talk about truth, right? You've got to think really hard about, okay, what thinkers are we going to bring in? What sort of stories are we going to tell? But once you sort of get in that space and suddenly there's that kind of, moment where somebody goes back and forth and you think like, oh, this is it. Like, this is the conversation. Like, let's keep this going. It's like a little like flame, right? I found that writing the book was a lot like this as well. I had this experience. Meghan and I would go back and forth. The way we would write it is honestly, we take one of the topics that we thought like, I've got a sort of hot take on this. Like, I'm really into this question. One of us had sort of, we'd write up a chapter, give it to the other person. The other person would just totally destroy it and rewrite it like from the ground up. And then we'd go back and forth. And then, partly because we were writing this right at the beginning of the pandemic and partly because we live like 2 houses away from each other, we take these incredibly long walks all around South Bend and all around campus, all around Notre Dame, where we would just hash out all of the different philosophical issues that were coming up. And in those conversations, again, like, getting to a point where we could really connect and sometimes disagree, honestly. Like sometimes, we'd get to a point where I think like, like this is totally the right argument here. And Meghan would say, no, it's, wrong for this point, whatever. Getting to that point for me is where, the kind of the magic happened. Like Meghan said, we then, we actually would go to the fellows. We'd have these book clubs where we'd go to the fellows, we'd have them read a chapter. And then again, that discussion would just start all over again. And suddenly we'd see, man, there's like 8 different angles that you could take on this. And so that it was an opportunity just to have all these discussions. I mean, I spent like, 2% of the time actually like typing furiously or like writing. Most of it actually like wrote on my iPhone at night. Most of it was just conversations, right? And then the process of writing is just kind of capturing those and trying to make sure they get into the book, like that we somehow, collect those ideas.
And that's the thing. I thought it was incredible how many different perspectives kind of show up in the book. And something that I noticed is you guys include some of those differing opinions. You acknowledge that there is no right answer to some of these questions. And one of the things that I was curious about is, how do you decide when to compromise and when to leave some of those clashing ideas in?
Ooh, do you want to go first, Megan, or should I?
Sure, I can kick it off. So,
Do
so
it.
one thing, if viewers hadn't have a chance to see the book yet, the way it's structured is the opening chapter is just why places like Notre Dame care so much about teaching the good life and teaching philosophy. But then each chapter takes up a different virtue. So how do you get yourself to care about the truth? How do you understand what it is to have a proper relationship with money? What does it mean to really generously love other people and attentively love them? And kind of moves up into questions about religious faith, and then ends with the really big ones. Like, how do you reconcile the fact that you're going to die? The things that in our class kind of moves through this like simpler, more mundane to heavier valence. And one of the things that Paul and I try to show in the book, and we also try very hard to do this for all of our students here on campus, is first, there's always some practical case studies for each thing. So we don't jump into teaching Plato's Republic until we've talked a little bit about how difficult it is to talk about American politics right now and what that looks like at Notre Dame's campus. When we talk about money, this is the part that's most embarrassing about for my family, is like I get into some of my family finances and some hard decisions that we've had to make about money. And so first we try to ground things in real experiences, and that's not an accident. That's Aristotle's method as well. We also try to put out our reasons for making the decisions that we've made out there as clearly as possible and indicate if we think we made the wrong decision, or if in retrospect we understood why it was the right decision more deeply. So try to show that work, like we're doing the work in our own life. We have some personal stake in these debates. And then when we start disagreeing about, and the areas where I think we disagree the most about are whether Truman was morally responsible for bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you get far enough into the book, you'll realize that Paul and I have really different takes on that question. We have pretty different takes on the problem of evil, but one thing that's been great about working on this book with Paul is we've both, I think, gotten way better theories about why God might permit suffering than we had before we started the book. But we try to really get out a lot of why we care about the answers and how these philosophical questions have shown up in our own lives before we jump into where we disagree. So we don't treat these as kind of abstract debate topics, but rather as questions that we really need to get philosophical answers for in the context of our own lives. That the truth matters to us. And that's why, the disagreement is going to be cast as trying to figure out a better answer to a hard question that matters for how we're living our lives. And that's something we also very much try to model for our students, is like disagreement for disagreement's sake is dumb. But a lot of these questions are so difficult that unless you really try to understand how other people have ended up in different places, you might end up being stuck in the wrong way of thinking. I don't know, Paul, does that kind of capture it?
Oh, totally. I think, one way that I think about this is, it's a real challenge when you're teaching philosophy, because especially philosophy, that you really care about, like that you think, the answers really do matter. If you're teaching ethics, like there are a lot of issues that just like are deeply personal, or they touch on sort of deeply personal topics. And there's a real challenge there, right? Because as a teacher, you don't want to go into a classroom and say like, well, here's the right answer. Everyone learn why. I've learned over the course of my teaching that you also don't want to go in and say like, well, I'm not going to tell you what I think. I'm just going to like be very objective and neutral and totally detached. So you've got to, kind of find a middle way. The way that I think about it is I think of, Meghan and I in our teaching and in the book, almost like physical, like fitness trainers or like gym instructors, but for the mind, in the following way. There are better and worse ways to work out, right? There are better and worse ways to exercise. And there's a clear aim. You want to be healthy. You want to be physically fit. And it's not obvious like how you should do that if you're just walking into the gym on day one, right? Now a gym instructor is gonna do something. You're gonna walk in and they're gonna say, look, you should move your body in this way, but not in this way. And make sure you're not like running too much before you eat protein. I don't know, all these kind of things. There are also points though at which they say like, you know what? I don't know. Like, I don't know, which is the healthier option for you. And they're really upfront about that. That's in a way what we're trying to do in the class, right? So students come in and we say, look, here's how we've puzzled through this argument in our own lives. Here's what Aristotle thinks, and here's how we interpret it. At the end of the day, I'm happy to tell my students, this is what I think, and here's my argument for it. I'm also happy for them to disagree with me. And I think, some of the best moments in teaching for me have been moments where students come up after class and said, the thing that you just said, I really disagree. And sometimes that's the first time they've told anybody about that. It's the first time they've ever told anybody they've doubted God's existence, or that, they've really taken it seriously. And again, that's a personal, crazy, sort of intimate moment where you can say, well, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about that. So for me, that's the real challenge, kind of finding that balance and finding a way of doing it where, yeah, it's authentic. And you're certainly like letting them know, like, I've got a sort of view on this, and the institution that we're at. I mean, that makes it all the more complex, right? Think about teaching philosophy here versus teaching philosophy at Harvard or, at Stanford or another campus. There are just all kinds of complications, all kinds of things that come up. And so, finding ways of navigating that, I think, it's become very engaging. It's become very rewarding as an experience. But that's kind of how I think about it. And it's sometimes good, I think, for students to see, yeah, smart people disagree. Well, I hope they think we're smart, Meghan, but, smart people disagree. This is what I think the right ethical view is. This is what Meghan thinks the right ethical view is.
Definitely. I mean, I remember my first time at Notre Dame when I heard someone doubt the existence of God in a philosophy class, like felt like a pin dropped, everyone's kind of looking around like, can we talk about this? So it's one of those things. It's tough. And I think it kind of falls into what we've been talking about is truth-seeking conversations. And I know you kind of mentioned there that there are some of these barriers that happen to having the conversations, but what are some of the skills or types of relationships that you can form either with students or students among themselves that allow for these conversations to happen?
I can kick it off.
Sure.
One thing that we lay out in the introduction to the book is there are kind of 4 skills philosophy has to offer. And this is definitely not going to guarantee you have a good life, but there are kind of 4 ways philosophy can contribute to your pursuit of truth and happiness. One we've already talked about is just learning how to ask better questions and check your intentions when you're asking questions. The second skill, we call it like the skill of developing agency. That sounds a little bit fancy, but basically knowing what you're responsible for and knowing what are things that just happen to you in life, and what are things that you want to take moral responsibility for, and how do you exercise that idea of who you are and what you're responsible for. The third big skill is related to the first 2. And that's how to pay attention to other people, especially in a loving way. I mean, how to understand what it is to really grasp the fact that other people have good lives, deep, rich lives that are seeking after the same really complex goals as you. And the skills and techniques that philosophers have used to try to really get into the lives of people that we care about. And then finally, the Stoic philosophers call this kind of joining up the circles, but basically you've got all of these episodes and people and questions. How do you tie them all together into like a kind of unified narrative of your life and the person that you're trying to become? And so one of the things that we try to do with students, and certainly try to show with the examples and cases we go through in the book, is that this sounds really grandiose, like working on your meaning of life. What an extraordinary goal to have for 2022. But in fact, there are lots of just very practical habits that help you develop those 4 key traits. So one is just realizing how to ask more open-ended questions about philosophical and political and religious matters. Another thing, this is maybe the developing agency, is how to describe your decisions in more philosophically serious ways. And so one way that I've been thinking about this in the new year, because of the pandemic and everybody working remotely, so many of my human interactions are over email. I don't know if everybody else has this feeling, but the amount that I interact with other people on email versus in real life has shifted dramatically. So one thing that I try to do in emails is, rather than just making them all purely transactional, sometimes trying to describe a little bit the morally significant observations I have about what we're doing. So for example, I might be pretty late in replying to an email from the Alumni Association asking me to fill out a document. And I might email somebody at the Alumni Association rather than just saying like, I'll get to it on Tuesday. Instead saying, I feel badly about having missed that deadline. There's a lot going on right now, but I also realize that you guys are trying really hard to put on this event for the community. And I know that like in the future, I want to be the kind of person that cares about the work that you do. And I see the work that you do. And like, here's my plan for what happens next. That's a couple sentences longer than the ordinary email, but also for people that I have not had a chance to meet in real life, it gives them a better sense of what's going on in my mind and the way that I understand who I am for them in this relationship. And so even little skills like that are part of what philosophy teaches us how to tell those stories in the right kind of way, in a concise way that gives other people access to our lives and our reasons, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's maybe too highfalutin.
Yeah, I'll jump in too if that's right, Ryan.
Go for it.
So, early in the book, the first chapter, we focus on this question of truth itself and how to become the kind of person who loves the truth, right? And one of the reasons why we focused in on this is because, there's a way of thinking about being sort of a good, sort of smart, intellectually serious person. And it goes like something like this. Look, as long as you're just, developing the right kind of skills, right? You're really critical and you can evaluate arguments and you're thinking hard. Then you just go out in the world and you're going to uncover the truth. And if somebody disagrees with you, you will have this rational argument and you will, decide who's right, and then you'll be done with it and you'll leave. And I think for anybody who's been out in the world or on Twitter, that this is just not how it goes, right? There's a lot of smart people, incredibly smart people. And we're further apart than we've been, for as long as I can remember. I mean, I'm not that old. So, there's this real question. So, okay, a puzzle, right? Like, what should we do about this, right? How do you sort of approach questions about the truth or arguments about what's true in a context like this? Okay, it turns out this is not the first time civilization has run into this problem. It turns out that this was the same problem or a very similar problem to the problem that Socrates was addressing in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, right, they were living in a direct democracy where your ability to persuade was more important than your ability to actually get to the truth, right? If you were the kind of person who was a very careful thinker, but you weren't that articulate, you could get to the truth, but it wouldn't matter if somebody stood up right in the assembly and said, I accuse you of a capital crime, and you couldn't persuade the masses that you were innocent, right? So this whole industry was built up that's called sophistry, right? The sophists are these debate coaches, and they would go around and just teach people how to persuade. Now, this drove Socrates crazy, right? And it drove Plato crazy. And Plato, of course, is writing all of this down in dialogue form, right? But so a lot of Plato's dialogues are depicting, Socrates talking to sophists and saying, look, you're smart, you're great at arguing, but you don't care about the truth. Not just you don't care about it, you don't love it. Now, that's a concept that I think, for me, when I came across it in philosophy, I thought, well, that's new, right? To love the truth. Like, I love a lot of things. I love my kids. I have these tiny kids and I love them. I even love like my home. I love coffee, but the truth, like, how would you love the truth? It's such an abstract thing. Well, it turns out, right, again, there's a whole sort of 2,000-year history of philosophy, people trying to teach us how to gain this virtue, right, and what it actually looks like in a human life. Now, it's not easy, and there's a lot more to be said here, but I'll just say, in the book, one of the examples that we bring up is conversations with people that we love about politics, right? Now, here's a place where, I don't know about you, but in my life, just, I guess, contingently, because my family's Irish Catholic, and like arguing with each other, debating with each other, yelling at the dinner table, that's like how we show each other that we love each other. If we can't argue about politics, like, that's a serious sort of problem, right? It drives us apart. And so we want to be able to have these conversations, but especially in the last 5-10 years, we just find ourselves like hitting all these hotspots and thinking like, we're so far apart on this. How could we actually approach this topic? Going back and reading the ancient Greeks, going back and reading Socrates, finding in Plato these beautiful images of inquiry, right? And of this way in which loving the truth more than you love winning arguments can be the sort of thing that you can devote your life to. Spoiler alert, like Socrates, right at the end of the Apology, he's given a choice. Like, you can continue to live in this way, pursue these arguments, or you can die. And he says, yeah, I'd rather die than live an unexamined life, than give this up, right? These are just, again, these are beautiful sort of images. And in my own life, in my own relationships, have sort of given me the start, the ability to kind of start broaching some of these huge divides. So I talk with my mom weekly or at least every couple of weeks. And the conversation, at least half of the time, is about politics and about things that we just are worlds apart on. But as long as we keep reminding ourselves, and as long as we keep reminding each other, at the end of the day, we're both motivated by the truth, right? I care more about us getting to the truth than I care about persuading you of this thing. And if we leave and you disagree with me, even if I think like, hey, that's actually kind of a bad decision, like that view is going to lead to like bad decisions. If I can say I care more about you as a person, I love you more as a person, and I love the truth more than I care about just getting you on my side or to have the right view, there's an opening, there's an avenue, there's a way of turning that into a dialogue, a philosophical dialogue. Even though, again, I don't want to make this sound easy. It's not easy. And, like, we'll frequently go through these, periods where it's like, we just can't talk about that for a while. But anyway, that's just to say, an example of one issue on which I think the ancients just can speak directly to our moment, like to the Twitter era. Yeah.
I think too, on this front, jumping in, Paul's family is very different from mine. My family really doesn't like to get into topics where we know we're not going to achieve agreement in an hour-long conversation. These can be hard issues. One thing that we try to do with students here, or with people who are just curious about what philosophy is remind them that in low stakes situations, we do still really love figuring out the truth. So everybody in my universe right now is obsessed with this game Wordle. I don't know if you guys are into this, but it's this word game. You play it. There's one word puzzle. It's released every day. I find it pretty difficult. But one thing that we will do up in my office is like try to figure out the Wordle together, just while we're waiting for a coffee to get made, and come up with the guesses. And man, it is the best thing in the universe when you get it in 3 or 4 guesses, especially if you're doing it with your friends. That feeling of like, bingo, I figured out the word using logic, that little like endorphin spike is the part of you that cares about the truth, and that realizes this can be fun. And this isn't Plato spends a ton of time in the Republic talking about how figuring out math puzzles, like geometry puzzles, is a part of the good life. And you read this and you're just like, why are we talking about math? This has gotten really boring. But it's because like there's the Wordle part of our souls that still loves the truth. And the hard thing, and Plato knew this as well, is taking that aspect of our characters and then reminding people that having discussions about who God is and how to live a good life in light of all of the serious problems that we face together. Those kinds of questions, they're much bigger and more serious than a Wordle puzzle, but the part of us that likes getting the answer in the small things will also enjoy that much more getting the answer in the big things. And so if you can help people see this kind of continuity, we've never given up on the truth. It's just sometimes we get overwhelmed by the complexity of it. And that's okay. Like, that's a reason to think that we're going to have to work harder on this, and that some of these conversations are going to be more difficult, but not that they should be given up on.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's something that really stuck out to me in the book as well, is it's creating these skills. It's crafting a way to approach the bigger topics. And I think a main thing that kind of comes up in the book is this idea of storytelling. And I know, I don't know if this is too much spoilers. I don't want to get too much in the weeds with Anscombe, but there's this argument that our telling stories and applying a personal experience kind of show our motivations and kind of help us to become more reflective people, and maybe help see arguments from others' perspectives. Paul, I know you write about your relationship with your mom in the book, and kind of approaching how you use stories and personal experience to kind of peel away some of the sophistry and just making arguments, and actually being able to kind of connect with people on these truth-seeking conversations. Can you guys speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, totally. There's a couple of different really important ways that storytelling and narrative comes into the book and our approach to the class more generally. One way is just through this idea, this ancient, philosophical idea of writing an apology. So day one, we tell our students that they walk into the class. One of the first things we tell them is by the end of this class, you are going to write an apology, right? And of course, we explain, we don't mean like an apology, like you're sorry. An apology, a philosophical apology, is an explanation of what you believe and a defense of why it's rational, like why you think you should believe the thing that you believe. And famously, they usually take the form of a life story, right? So Augustine writes the Confessions in part to convince all of his friends in elite society that he's not totally crazy for becoming a Christian, right? Which at the time, especially amongst the rhetoric teachers that he was talking to, it was seen as a very sort of barbaric religion. And gosh, their scripture is just like, it's the poetry's terrible. Like, what? How could you possibly do that? And Augustine says, okay, let me tell you the story, right? And he goes through this whole story. And in the course of doing that, he's answering these big philosophical issues. Where does meaning come from in life? What do I owe to other people? How should I be a good dad? I mean, actually, it's a really complicated question for Augustine in particular. But okay, so writing a philosophical apology, I mean, this is something that, for our students, this is what we want them to come away from the class with. And of course, when they do at the end of a semester, we want that to be a working document. We want them to return to that apology, metaphorically, but maybe literally too, throughout their life and continue to update it, right? Your apology is something you write over the course of your whole life. So in the book, we give prompts and we, encourage people to do little exercises, have dialogues. And our goal is the same for readers, that we want to encourage them to start thinking about their own apology and the way that their life story connects up with these philosophical issues. So that's one really important way that storytelling comes in. Really briefly, because I cannot manage not to talk about Anscombe when you bring up Anscombe. Elizabeth Anscombe, for our viewers, is she's one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. I'm really obsessed with a lot of her work. Just an incredible philosopher, incredible person. She's got this view, right? And like you said, Ryan, she thinks when it comes to figuring out what to do and figuring out, whether you've done the right thing, we can't just look at the consequences of your action. We can't just say well, you must have done the right thing. Why? Well, because, look at all the people that you've impacted and now they're happy and they wouldn't have been happy, right? One really important part, the consequences are important, of course, but one really important part of that process is asking, what was your motivation? What was your intention? And that often, maybe always, takes the form of a story. So the really silly example that I'll give my students is to say, I show up late to a meeting. I can tell two stories. One, I can come in and say, the traffic, the South Bend traffic, the world just conspired to keep me out of this. I'm so sorry, but there's nothing I could have done. That's one way of telling the story. And it's a way of telling the story that totally excuses me of any sort of responsibility, right? Can't blame me. It was just the traffic. Another one I could tell is I could come in and I could say, look, you guys, I just did not care enough about this meeting. I don't respect your time. I wouldn't do this. It'd be terrible, right? But I don't respect your time enough. I stopped to get coffee on the way. Here I am, right? There's one in which I'm taking responsibility for what I'm doing. I'm saying, yeah, I'm open to blame, right? You can blame me here. Now that's a silly example, but when you think about, some of the most important decisions, ethical decisions that we've made, things involving friends, family, you realize there is a story behind them, and to know the true story is incredibly important, right? If you've hurt somebody, to be able to tell that story accurately and in a way that from their point of view, they would say yeah, no, that is what happened, right? That is what you have to do before you could ever hope to be forgiven or reconcile, etc. And again, I don't want to give this the idea that this is only something you do when you've done something wrong. It can be, a way of taking responsibility for things that you think are really good things as well. But that's another way, and it connects up with the apology idea, but that's just another way in which stories play a really important role, a really practical role in doing ethics and doing philosophy.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's a great way to look at it, because I remember encountering Anscombe. It was after the course, it wasn't in the course material when I took the class, but that idea of diving more into intentions. I don't know if we have any utilitarians here, but the idea of intentionality has always kind of stood out to me. And I understand here that we're kind of coming up on this open question answer time. As we mentioned, we invite you to use the chat function to submit questions. The link for the form is coming through now. And we had some questions that were submitted in advance. So I think we'll start with the first one. This is a question from Dolly Duffy, Executive Director of the Notre Dame Alumni Association. And she writes, "Thank you for the fabulous conversation. Please tell us the story of the banner behind Meghan right now." I think they might be able to see it right there. Yes, corrupt the youth.
This
Meghan,
banner, I'm in all kinds of business and ordinary philosophy meetings outside of God and the Good Life, and it almost always gets commented now on Zoom, and I'm so proud of it. So corrupt the youth is the unofficial, I guess now we could say official motto of the God and the Good Life program. It comes from, so Paul mentioned this briefly, Socrates, the founder of philosophy 2,400 years ago, was famously brought up on charges by the Athenian government for all the ways that his philosophy was destabilizing their Athenian democracy. And some of the charges are all very silly. I mean, to us as modern readers, like he worships things under the ground. He's an atheist. That's one thing that the Athenian government was really concerned about. But the famous charge, and the one that everybody always remembers, is that he was charged with corrupting the youth because he was teaching the young men and women of Athens how to ask questions that sometimes presupposed that what Athens was teaching them about what was really valuable or good was not in fact true. So, I mean, Athens thought they were the best. They're kind of like Notre Dame. Athenians are very much like Notre Dame students and alums of just thinking, we are the greatest city on planet Earth. We're the best at athletics. We're the best at democracy, the best at religion, the best at math. Like we have nowhere else to go. Like we have achieved the pinnacle of human perfection. And Socrates was going around, asking some tough questions about whether or not Athenians could try harder, and whether or not they actually understood justice or actually understood the nature of the things that they claimed to be experts on. And the Athenian government got upset about this and eventually told Socrates to either shut up or die. And he chose to die because he really, cared that much about the truth and the good life and care for the soul. So Socrates is an edgy kind of counterculture figure also within philosophy. He's never willing to accept things the way they appear, but always trying to push other people to do better, especially young people. And we teach Socrates always at the very beginning of our class as kind of this one of many models that we've been given throughout history of people who are capable of really loving each other and the truth that much. And so we have a bunch of stickers. I don't exactly remember when the merchandise started, but we've got stickers with Socrates on them that say corrupt the youth that are everywhere. It's always embarrassing when you see them stuck to like a light pole around campus. During March 2020, April 2020, Ryan, if you'll remember, we were all sent home right after spring break, and God and the Good Life moved online. And we were spending just tons of time on Zoom with students talking about how much we wanted to come back together and what it would be like to just have this like glorious return to class. And we had the big banner commissioned during that first phase of the pandemic, thinking like, all right, if we get the banner, then we have to have a classroom to hang it in. Like they've got to let us come back to class if we've spent all this money on this huge banner. And sure enough, when we got back in the fall, I remember we had our retreat with all of the students who help us with GGL right before the semester started in fall 2020. And we were out in this big tent and we hung the banner off the tent and we were just like, we're back. Like the corruption of the youth at Notre Dame will not stop. So ever since then, the banner has been kind of a reminder for me of the beautiful culture and seriousness of purpose for all of the students and teachers that are involved with God and the Good Life.
That's the thing. I mean, as former part of the teaching team, it becomes the mission. It becomes, the banner that we kind of rally behind. And I guess one of our other questions that was submitted from Granger, Indiana, is kind of getting more into the nitty gritty of how do we corrupt the youth? Can you give us a taste for the content of the course? And what are some of those key questions? I know we talked about big questions earlier. If my memory serves, I think they even pop up on the website, but what do those look like in the course?
Yeah, so the course is organized in the following way. So we've got 4 really big questions that we want to explore with the students. One is, what do you owe to other people? What do you owe to yourself, right? How do you live a good life? And what is a good life? Another one is, how should you figure out what to believe? How should you value the truth? What does it mean to love the truth? Another one is, should you practice a religion? And then the 4th one is, what would it take for your life to be meaningful? Under each of those questions, we've got specific claims that we're interested in exploring with the students. So if you even go to our website, which Meghan has posted, godandgoodlife.nd.edu/syllabus. If you go to the website, you'll see, each of the course days, there's a little tile and it says something like, doubt everything. And we're not telling you to doubt everything. We're saying that's the claim we're looking at today, right? Socrates thinks you should doubt everything, right? Or another course day might be something like, there is a God, or practice a religion, or there is no God, right? So some of these, even the claims that we're investigating are contradictory, right? But each of the class days, we're asking one of those questions. And again, they're really big questions. We went to write the book, we took a very similar approach, right? So each of the chapters is devoted to a different sphere of life, a different sort of area of life where we think philosophy has got a lot to offer. So the first chapter is about truth and about dialogue and about talking to other people. Another chapter, a great chapter on love and what it means to love and to attend to people in the right sort of way that you care about. Money, as Meghan mentioned earlier, what should you do about money? Especially like money you have, right? Or money you've earned. As separate from, there's another chapter on work, right? Like what can philosophy tell you about work? So in each of those areas, we're looking at particular philosophers as sort of guides, as people who have said something really important, really meaningful, and something that speaks directly to our time. And again, we don't just assume they're right. We argue with them. And sometimes we think like, no, look at, that's crazy. It's kind of nuts. Like how far they took that. But that's how we organize things, right? Is really in terms of those questions and in terms of asking questions. I guess the last thing I'd say on this too is that's also how we train our dialogue leaders, right? We distinguish between different kinds of questions, and then we show sort of which questions are going to be the most productive questions to start a philosophical dialogue. So instead of, going up to somebody and or talking to a room full of your peers and saying like, why aren't you all vegan, right? Because clearly animals have sentience, and why are you, this is just going to like immediately fire up all the parts of us that are not going to be helpful in a discussion. How can you reframe that, right? So that people actually want to enter into it. How can you say like, have you ever had an experience that's changed your relationship with food? Think like, gosh, yeah, man. Like, man, I was on a farm and I saw a sad cow. I don't know. Brings up a story, brings up experience, and then you can kind of engage in that way. So, in a way, just questions and learning how to ask good questions, and then sort of picking out questions that are really meaningful to living a good life. That's sort of our whole method. That's our whole approach.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear, because not everyone has had the chance to take the course, and not everyone has the chance to be as closely involved with Notre Dame philosophy department. So it's great to hear kind of how God and the Good Life course and I guess the book approach these type of things. But I know we have a lot of alumni and Notre Dame parents on the call. I think my mom's somewhere on the call, so I want to give her a quick shout out. But one of the questions we have from Granger, Indiana, is as a Notre Dame parent, what is your advice for current students? For students who haven't had the chance to, have the youth corrupted in the GGL class, what's your advice there?
I can kick it off. I think one thing that we talk a lot about as a teaching team, and we talk a lot about with the students who are already in God and the Good Life, is it is hard to be a college student. I think it's gotten a lot harder the last 2 years, but like the figuring out how you're going to set out on adult life and what goals you're going to make a meaningful part of the person that you're trying to become. It frankly gets a lot easier in your 30s and 40s when you get settled in a job and with a family and with a set of commitments. And it's significantly harder when you're 18, 19, 20. One of the things that we care about so much, and we think Notre Dame as a university really has on its heart, is realizing that we need to serve young people, your kids, as they're starting off on crafting the life that they're going to live. And so we take that responsibility really seriously. and very much want to come alongside families and give students intellectual resources and also another set of adults who really care about them that'll help them start to craft that vision so that they'll leave this place not only making us proud, but also with the really incredible, hard to enumerate value of that kind of integrity and confidence and skill and awareness of their soul. So the advice that we give to students, I personally don't take advising students lightly. I think a lot of adults tend to give this kind of dismissive advice to college students of like, everything's fine. You already go to Notre Dame. Even if you're feeling stressed about your life right now, it doesn't matter. You're going to get a great job. I used to give advice like that when I was a junior faculty member all the time. And it's not taking seriously the incredible work that young people are doing right now, philosophical work and emotional work and intellectual work and spiritual work to become the adults that they're striving to be. So when we give advice to students, one of the first things we do is try to acknowledge the seriousness with which they come to a place like Notre Dame and the mission that we have while they're here. Don't give them flippant like advice that's like, get rich quick or your problems are going to be solved quickly, because these kinds of big philosophical problems we've been talking about are never solved quickly. But another concrete piece of advice is to realize all of the people who care for them and are in their court. So if a student's feeling like they're really at sea about what they should major in, or they haven't gotten a summer internship yet, and they feel like this is going to be the end of the world. That's a conversation Paul and I have quite a bit with juniors. Or they're having trouble making friends, or they can't deal with another year of pandemic restrictions. Listening to them and practicing some of these philosophical skills that we teach in class in office hours, but also saying, look around you at all of the people in your family, the rectors and people that you live with in your dorm, your philosophy professors and GGL fellows. You have this team of people who are going to help you figure out this really hard problem. And giving them that confidence, which is maybe in short supply in the era of social distancing, that there is a community of people that care about them, who've navigated these own difficulties in their life and who want to see them flourish, not just by getting a great internship or a great job. We hope that, but by achieving eudaimonia, like genuine happiness. And that, again, if these problems are not solved quickly, but helping students realize that the resources for those big existential problems are around them just the same as there's a career center is, I think, something that we take quite seriously. I don't know, Paul, does that kind of capture it?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Gotten harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you guys said that, because the theme I'm picking up is that caring about the people in the community, whether it's the students taking the course, the discussion leaders. I know we've handled a couple, tragedies, a pandemic, all of that stuff, and just kind of showing that the teaching team is there for the students. And I guess it kind of leads to this theme on what is probably going to be our last question that came in about the course raises questions about how you genuinely care for and love other people. I know in a largely secular world and a place that's not always Notre Dame, what kind of ways can we do this and kind of cultivate that love, I think, as it's put in the book? What are good ways to do that?
Yeah, so I'll start. I'll try to go really quickly so we can maybe both answer this one. In the book, we raise the idea that love is more than just what you do for other people, right? We often think about love as an action, and it often is. My caring about my kids is expressed in my giving them food, or hugging them, or taking them for a walk, whatever it might be. But there's also this distinctively almost intellectual or attentive aspect of love, like knowing another person's inner life, right? Knowing what motivates them, what they believe, and caring about that, right, is a really deep and important way of loving other people. Now, luckily for us, there's a lot of philosophy that's involved in doing that, right? So one way that we encourage our students to think about this, and our dialogue leaders, and honestly, like anybody that I talk to about this stuff, is try to find and create communities where you can ask and answer these philosophical questions together, right? I don't think anybody should read this book alone. Actually, I don't know if you want to do that, sure, but that's fine too. But I think it's absolutely, it's even better if you can find somebody that you can work through it with, right? At the end of each of the chapters, we've got these short exercises or lists of questions, and a sort of, one of my sort of big hopes or aspirations here, again, in the book or in the class, is that people will find the kind of connection that I so often find with my philosophical colleagues, or more generally just with people around campus, people in South Bend that I really care about. Like just sitting down with somebody and saying, like, what do you actually think about? It could be about a really big issue about death. Like, are you afraid of it? I'm kind of scared of it. Like, are you Socrates thinks we shouldn't be afraid of it. Like, is that crazy? So, just realizing, that can be loving somebody, and it requires vulnerability, a lot of other stuff. But, from my perspective, that's a great place to start.
I think one thing I would add, and this could be a whole other session unto itself. In fact, I hope it is. It takes up a lot of the book, loving other people and then extending your love to somebody like God, like really wrestling with the philosophical questions that come out of that. But as Paul said, one thing that we really try to drive home with our students and readers is this idea that contemplating why you love people that you love is a really important philosophical skill and a way of knowing about your moral obligations and understanding the world that you're in. We talk a lot about, we find this in unexpected places. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, conqueror of Germany, like huge important figure in ancient Rome, founder of Stoicism, writes his book, The Meditations, or he keeps his journal of the Meditations, and he spends a good bit of time in the opening going through all of his friends and acquaintances and family members and just reflecting on what specifically he loves about them or admires in them. And he gets like weirdly specific. Like he admires the fact that his one friend didn't completely fall apart when his son died, and thinks about that the friend's story and his friend's reaction to that story and what it shows about his friend's character. And in the process of doing this, Marcus comes to realize who he is and who he's aspiring to be and what's ultimately of value in these people that some part of him knows is deeply valuable, but he just couldn't explain why until he did this process. I think we are all in this situation, especially the last 2 years, where we are far away from people that we care about. Certainly students are in this boat when they go away to college. We can't do things for or with or to them very efficiently. So it's a bad idea to just track something like love based on the consequences of our actions. But we can still spend time like thinking about the people we love, praying about them if that's part of your tradition, thinking about their stories and why it matters that they have had the lives that they've had. And that grows this virtue in us of this capacity of love, but also helps us understand what the heck is going on with our life because we're paying attention to details that kind of pass us by in the day-to-day. And that's an important tradition in philosophy, like learning how to pay that kind of attention to people.
Definitely. Yeah, no, and that's I think we're coming up on time. So I think that's a really nice note to end on. And hopefully we've grown closer to the truth with our discussion today. I want to thank you guys and thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to announce that in just a few weeks on Friday, February 25th at 12 Eastern, Meghan and Paul will return to Think ND and we'll dive into part 2 of the book. This hopefully didn't do too much spoilers and hopefully covered a lot. But additionally, we're going to add 2 more events in this series that will be covering how philosophy can help us find meaning and purpose at work. Those events will be Friday, March 18th and April 29th, also at noon Eastern. So if you've not yet picked up your copy of The Good Life Method, you can do so at any book retailer. If you enjoyed the book, please make sure to leave a review on Amazon, Goodreads, barnesandnoble.com, etc. If you're looking for more Meghan and Paul content, please check out those 2 Think ND series, What Makes a Life Good and What to Believe in Uncertain Times. These 2 video series are led by Professor Sullivan and Blaschko and can be found under the series tab at think.nd.edu. If you enjoyed today's program, please note that we have many similar live events on Think ND. Please check them out and register to participate. These talks are always free and open to the public, so please do share with your family and friends. That's all we've got. Thanks again for your participation and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank
everybody.
You.
Thank you so much.